Our topic for today is security in Open RAN. No? And what basically happened was when this was conceptualized, wherein you have one monolithic telco infrastructure. No? They want to break it down into multiple pieces. So anyone with expertise on different components and elements would have could concentrate on it and basically break away from the monopoly of individual vendors before. And we'll be discussing a lot of security practices here also from NIST cybersecurity frameworks, critical security controls, among others. And maybe if there's still time, I could demo some vulnerability assessment scanning and maybe a use case on what really a penetration testing is, as mentioned by Ma'am Irene. Huh? So, yeah, we'll discuss threat modeling, security controls and risks, the zero trust architecture, NIST CSF, CIS, and some key learning points towards the end. And I'll be presenting also some of my references for the course, which is going to be very helpful. So I think most of the readings of this course would be listed here, and that takes a lot of time since this is a technically heavy reading. Sometimes I call it bedtime story papers. So you most likely gonna feel sleepy in the first, second, or third, especially if that's not your cup of tea. But I'm sure nagbabasa kayo ng mga standards, no? Medyo ganun din, but you really need to learn it. Daanin sa kape. Okay, so Open RAN security. What does it actually mean, especially yung open na component of it? So the main goal is for using Open RAN is to have interoperability standards for RAN elements. This refers to intentional capability of the software hardware interfaces to comply on an agreed upon standard. So that's the very basic definition of open. Now, while we advocate open source software, it does not necessarily mean na puro open source yung Open RAN. So I saw on the Q&A kanina, there's someone asking for source codes, no, for the Open RAN end-to-end. No? So wala pa ako nakita na available publicly in GitHub or GitLab, but there are some components na you could see, but hindi pa siya end-to-end. Kasi again, you want vendors, traditional telco vendors, to be able to develop their own intellectual property, and up to them if they're gonna open it na source, no, open source yung system nila, or they're gonna use yung pinaka-basic definition of Open RAN, which is open for interoperability, and they are following certain standards. No? There's also open source hardware. So not entirely new, but the concept that we had for the longest time is open source software. But now we have open source hardware, wherein the design and even the build process, on some components, you could publish it online and for anyone to replicate. But again, this is still new. I haven't seen an actual open source component for na hardware for Open RAN, but it's also up in the open. But most importantly, it's really the open interfaces. No? So you have to follow certain standards. Now, this is a bit tricky and stringent din yung testing that's gonna be put into place here for the fact that we all encountered this, no? Especially sa mga networking guys. You have, let's say, for example, 3 switches, multiple vendors claiming to talk spanning 3 protocol. No? So you could loop them up, and they're going to be shutting out interfaces if they see a loop, and it's going to turn on just in case magkaroon ng link breakage. No? So it's going to be a redundant link. But I have encountered a lot of issues when vendor A, vendor B, and vendor C all claims to be following, let's say, a standard STP, spanning 3 protocol. Then you put them up on the network, and then you have a broadcast storm, or routing loop. And when you check, tama naman yung redundancy ng interconnectivity na ginawa mo. STP is supposed to be kicking in, to check yung loops, and then cut it off and then just use it for redundancy. But it's not working. There are minute changes dun sa mga implementation on the protocol, which makes them somewhat incompatible. Although they are claiming on their data sheet na, well, we're talking STP, no? But not always the case in actual practice. So they at least Open RAN wants that to be minimized, no? If not totally eliminated. Ideally, it's eliminated, but well, for realistic view, it has to be minimized. And what would happen here now is a lot of the testing would be put into place because you don't want some component, no, that's not talking appropriately to other interfaces and elements to be on your core RAN network. So I hope you got this from the previous slide. No? So Open RAN is not necessarily open source. It's advocating it, but it's mainly on the interfaces, so to speak. And with open source, no, there's two schools of thought on the security of open source. Others says it's not secure, okay? Because, well, you could see the code and there are vulnerabilities on it. You could check it out. If you go to an open source project on GitHub, you'll see, no, yung actual code and then some issues, no, which is for all the public to see. On the other side of the coin, there's a school of thought that, well, anyone could see it and it's open source, so anyone could contribute for the fix. That makes it secure. No? So no right and wrong answer, but they're both correct. But yung sabihin na the open source is inherently not secure, no? As compared to closed source, that's I would say yun yung issue. Kasi if closed source naman, open source would argue that, well, you cannot see the source code, so how sure are you that it is secure, no? But parang naging ganun, security to obscurity. You cannot see the source code, so you cannot make assessment and changes on it, no? Kasi, well, it's proprietary. And we've seen this in the past, no? Proprietary softwares being broken into, no? Na exploit with vulnerabilities found by researchers. So again, it could be open source, could be closed source, but again, Open RAN is not necessarily open source. Okay? We need to keep that in mind. So for current state of Open RAN security, it's still in the development process. So we do have threat modeling and remediation analysis. So that's the most mature part dito sa Open RAN security. Why? Because components and elements are still being developed. No? Although the architecture is already there, a lot of the security part would be falling now dun sa threat modeling. Okay? Because you want to find out end-to-end what's gonna happen, what's the components, vulnerabilities, ano yung exposure niya. Okay? And that falls now into yung next requirement specification. It's mature, but it's still in progress. Kasi each and every component nito would be having different features, no? And while it is written down, kung ano yung expect na feature requirement, may mga in progress pa rin in relation to security. Kasi sometimes you wouldn't want to put in too much security, which makes the system unusable or very hard to configure and prone to mistakes. No? So you want to still keep a balance of security and usability for anything, no? Not only in Open RAN. Then we have protocol specification like TLS, DTLS, SSH, and IPsec. And what's happening here is they would want to mainly secure all traffic within the Open RAN network. No? Hence, the mga transport layer protocols like this are heavily referenced and used in the Open RAN environment. And again, since these are still being developed, yung test specification is still in progress. So, especially for security, although we do have some of it. So these are the current documentation that we have based on Open RAN Alliance. Most of these are available today, especially mga components like yung mga mature components, no? Like O1, A1 interfaces, E1, F1. Some of this came from 3GPP requirements also. And others are, well, still being developed, and it's still going to be modified, no, as we go along and problems arise. No? So, but this is a good benchmark on where we are today with Open RAN security and its challenges. No? And if you see seminars on Open RAN security, you'll hear yung yung issues kanina, like do you use open source ba o hindi? Is it secure? Is it not secure? No? So there's a lot of ongoing discussions on it, but I would still maintain my neutrality on which is more secure, closed source or open source, due to the fact that each and every one of that two school of thought is have their own advantage and disadvantages. No? And again, if you are a vendor that wants to delve into Open RAN, you want to keep a level of intellectual property, kasi doon ka rin kikita for licensing and improvement on other research. No? So I would understand why not a lot of them would want to open source their infrastructure. But then again, there are end-to-end Open RAN solutions na open source that you could maybe interact with or deploy, no? Kahit sa mga lab environments. Okay. Like this one, my isang component ng Open RAN why it's complicated. Sabi nga yung old social media natin, is because yung Open RAN deployments tends to hindi na siya single vendor, no? So you tend to deploy multiple vendors talking to each and every elements. Unlike before na pag sinabi ng isang vendor na ng RAN elements nyo na okay, black box to end to end, you could talk you could interface to it and configure it, no? But that's gonna be you're tied up basically to a single vendor, no? And you're at their mercy. And the problem there was as I've seen with other telco deployments, no? It's not really, may controversy sinabi yung isang telco owner, no, na narinig ko na on one seminar na you don't really somewhat own yung box and system, no, ng end-to-end. You are basically I wouldn't say consign, no, but dineploy lang sa iyo yung infrastructure, and even if you want to change something, you would have to do change request dun sa vendor, no? So it's not you or engineers mo that's doing the operations. You would be maintaining it, no, and checking for telemetry, configuring something. But if you want a feature or an improvement, no, sometimes it's gonna be passed through a change request to that vendor. Okay, and of course may cost involved, and you're not the one making changes, no? Sila yung papadala ng engineer to do the change for you. Now with Open RAN, not sure how you would put this into perspective. Parang ganun ba yung mangyayari tapos marami sila, or would you have now control dun sa RAN network nyo, no? So wait and see until we have a full telco deployment on how would this actually work, no? Now there is an Open RAN Alliance Security Task Group which engages ORAN Alliance Working Group to tackle just the security component of all ORAN interfaces. So for the course, no, may short intro about that Open RAN security in 5G networks, no, from openranpolicy.org. 4 pages, just half hour, and we'll be requiring students to create a one-pager key highlights and takeaway for this as part of their coursework. Now, ano yung security risk, no, ng Open RAN? So the problem now, as you've seen and I discussed, no, on the previous slides, was yung threat surface mo is now expanded. That is just one black box, no? Now you have to protect from external attacks. Now you have components from different vendors would have different vulnerabilities depending on their implementation and their maturity ng mga testing process nila. And you need to be able to close security vulnerabilities, especially associated with the near real-time RAN intelligent controller. And you need to address threats to trust chains, no, introduced by decoupling functions. Kasi nga, you're gonna be talking to different vendors na per component, no. Most likely a big vendor, the likes of, let's say, Nokia, Ericsson, Huawei, they would have all the components then on their end to end. But you might see na, oh, ito sa component ito mas magaling sila Ericsson, no? So palitan natin to. Itong component na to okay kay Huawei, they get that too. But now you have wouldn't say chop suey of vendors na you have to manage. Dati isa lang kausap mo, now you have to talk to a lot of them. So that's gonna be a problem. And how sure are you na secure yung end-to-end process nila? which could be basically defeating yung mga chain of trust. Kasi we do have supply chain compromise right now. If for the network guys, if you've heard yung SolarWinds incident last time, someone was able to gain access to SolarWinds network by supposedly a weak password, SolarWinds 123. Okay, and from that on, the threat actor was able to access yung code repository nung vendor and insert their own backdoor. So when the time comes that the software has to be compiled, the backdoor was there, and even the software was signed. And when the clients of that vendor started updating, pati yung backdoors na sumama dun sa updates nila. So now pag sa security, we are advocating awareness, update mo lahat, patch mo lagi. Medyo nagkaroon ng setback. Gusto ba natin mag-update? Gusto natin mag-wait and see kasi pwede palang ma-insertan ng malicious functions yung update na ginagawa natin. So I would say that's a sad story. Hopefully we minimize that kind of supply chain compromise, but it is reality. Advanced threat actors are able to do that at this day and age. We also would want to address security ng mga interfaces according to security industry best practice. So dito I think medyo nag-ano si OpenRAN that they don't want to dictate anong klaseng testing yung gagawin mo. There are a lot of frameworks na to do this now, which we'll be discussing some of it. So they just stated here that we will be using industry best practices for this security part ng OpenRAN. Okay, but they'll dictate some, especially mga threat modeling and exposures. But for the testing part, no OpenRAN specific testing yung ginawa nila. Kasi if you see yung OpenRAN testing document, which involves performance, capacity, and a component of it would be security. Nothing new there, but they just of course would want to document it for everyone to have some reference to follow. We would also want next to practice a higher level of due diligence for exposure to public exploit, especially na you are using open source. So ito yung medyo may advantage open source to a degree, depending on how you would look at it. Since the source code is open, anyone would now be able to check it out, find some vulnerabilities, and again, create a patch to resolve that. But if your system is using that component, you should be able to determine agad na, oops, meron itong component, sige, ganitong vendor, then you could contact the vendor if may patch na ba sila. No, ideally, it's the vendor that's doing it for you. But last year, we have a critical vulnerability sa log4j. It's a Java library for logging. And it turns out, akala nila sobrang basic lang ng vulnerability. Turns out, a lot of software is actually using that open source component. And the funny thing, or a sad thing, a lot of the vendors are not even aware if they are using that library, that vulnerable library. So when the patching comes, parang may wiki page pa ng vulnerable softwares na nag-update per hour as I see it. And then a lot of the security guys are basically na yung homepage namin. Checking kung biglang may lalabas na system or software that was using that library. And now we have to contact the vendor and figure out that do we shut this down or do you have a patch that's coming in na we could test and before putting it in production. So there's that on the open source, but there's also that factor sa closed source. Others sa closed source side naman is they have known for an exploit pero they are taking some time to develop the patch. And at that time na develop yung patch, well, you are exposed. And sometimes you don't get notifications. So which is which. So again, walang again, neutrality on open source versus closed source security. Reiterating sinabi ko kanina, there is pros and cons on both sides. Another, of course, is implement defenses from physical attack. Since pag 5G, ang problem is you got a lot of cells, dahil shorter range siya than the traditional 2G, 3G, 4G networks. Now you have a lot of physical spaces na you need to secure. Ito is I'm not gonna be covering yung physical attacks kasi ibang ibang aspect, no? But there's a lot of frameworks on how to defend against physical attack, no? So from locks, CCTV for detection control, fences, no? Or even armed security guards on remote areas na medyo critical, okay? Especially for mga provinces, no? We've heard that stories na threat groups would be attacking cell sites if they are not paying some taxes, no? So to speak. So, or that's attack, destroying it. What if it's a threat actor that wants to get inside the network and plugs a malicious device on that side of the network? They may or may not be able to gain into the core network. No? So, yet to see. No? Now, for ORAN threat modeling, we have around 30 data and interface assets and 10 components assets. So we want, of course, to discuss, or at least on this talk, give an overview, no? Yung mga threats against ORAN, threat against the OCloud, yung open source software, we've been discussing it for quite some time. And then, of course, yung physical part. Then threat against radio networks, and of course, yung machine learning component. There's a huge threat on machine learning if others are able to introduce various call it adversarial learning. So yung training data nila would learn malicious behavior, and they would consider it as baseline, no? Basically nalason mo na yung yung machine learning component, especially if you're doing security with machine learning. If yung training data mo is actually dirty, no? The machine learning algorithm might not be able to detect something malicious kasi it's considering that action as legitimate. Stakeholders, you got your mobile network operators, you got your technology providers, you got your admins, and of course yung mga integrators and testers. So that's a lot of the components nito na you want to assess. And on the other side of the fence, that's the ones that are gonna be attacking you. Well, you got cyber criminals. Ito yung mga well, most of this would be considered cyber criminals. Ito yung umbrella descriptions sa kanila. You got cyber terrorists that wants to inflict harm on your critical infrastructure. You got the hacktivists that has something to say, okay, and they are using your infrastructure to decommission it, put it offline, and then release a statement because either they don't like you or what you're doing, or because splash damage ka lang, no? They don't want this kind of policy, and ikaw yung available platform, so they're gonna attack you and use you as a broadcasting platform, and na wala ka na makinalaman sa policy na ayaw nila, nagkataon lang. There's also nation-state APTs, no? Advanced Persistent Threat, that's funded by various government across the globe who wants to get inside your network for various reasons, no? You could be a target because they want access to your telecom infrastructure and maybe locate some people, read their messages, or listen to their voice calls. So this could be this is a real threat, no? And there's a lot of case studies wherein threat actors are penetrating telecommunication networks for various reasons. Then others just to gain funds, others again to monitor users or clients, no? On that level. Insider threat is also a thing because, well, if you have an employee that would want to earn quick bucks or wants to gain information, no? Sometimes may mga stories dito about, let's say, yung ex niya gusto ipatrack, no? So kakausap na insider sa telco, nakaibigan niya, and then they could figure out nasaan yung mga users, or on one story, no, not really telco related, no, we got this threat actors na ransomware operators that they would contact employees, no, on the organization, and promise them money, no, in exchange for getting them access to the infrastructure. Either minsan papadala ng email, tapos i-execute lang yung email, then you could have possible deniability na hindi ko alam kung na malware pala yan, or give you a USB, di-deploy mo sa network mo, okay? and then they're gonna encrypt basically yung environment, no? And ask you to ask the organization to pay up, no? And if they do pay, you get part of the proceeds, no? And let's see if I could. There was a story a few years back, no? Not really that long, 2 or 3, no? Basically, ransomware operator with links to Russia, no? Entity, no? They contacted a Tesla employee, okay? And they practically did what I was discussing, no? Na bigyan sila ng code, i-execute niya, and then if successful yung operations nila and Tesla paid, no? They would be having part of the proceeds, no? So yan, like this one, special projects yung employee, and he was offered $500,000, no, to install malware on Tesla's network. So that's how much sa atin to? Mga 30 million pesos, no, for just bringing in malware sa environment, tas bahala na sila to resolve this, no? So this is gonna look very enticing, and if you do this sa Philippines na ganitong kalaki, no, retirement na to definitely. But at what cost? So at least on this part, yung employee coordinated with the internal team and eventually contacted FBI, and then they arrested yung mga ransomware operators that nakalink sa kanya. So that's well, not sad to say, no, that's the world we're dealing with. Even yung mga internal employees natin ngayon medyo tamanduda with their access. Hence there are some frameworks na we'll be discussing in a bit, no, for that. Now, continuing sa ORAN threat modeling, we got security measures, of course. How do we deal with the threat modeling documentation inside yung mga requirement specification documents, and then inside protocol specification documents? So a lot of these are a bit bookish, okay, but they are detailed and specific also. And then once you got all of that into place, you would now assess each and every component and interfaces, no? If nation state, let's say OCloud, ano yung risk assessment natin dito? Highly targeted but hard to reach. So maybe medium. Or let's say sa near real-time intelligent controller, high risk, no? Because if anything goes wrong with that, we're gonna get either data compromise or outage that's gonna impact most of our infrastructure. So you would be assessing, no, yung mga components and ano yung play nila across the environment. Now for risk assessment, Microsoft has some tools, no, for threat modeling. Just maybe try to search for this. There's a Microsoft threat modeling tool for threats, no, and they're using the STRIDE model that would discuss na dito basically yung Microsoft software security development lifecycle. What's the STRIDE model? Ano yung mga categories of attacks that you want to figure out, and then ano yung mga mitigations, no? So there's a lot of good documents, and even the tool for Microsoft, you could download it for free, no? So you could use this not only in Open Run. If you have some projects that you could want to do threat modeling, which I encourage you to do so, especially dun pa lang sa mga projects na kino-conceptualize. This is a good way to discuss, diba? Ano yung mga possible attacks that we would experience, ano yung likelihood, ano yung risk, okay? And then you could now make justification for additional controls, trainings, or people, no, for operating that environment. Now, this is from BSI, no, a German-based company, consulting firm that did assessment on ORAN. They practically did a detailed documentation on, say, for the victim's perspective, no, as a component of the threat modeling risk analysis. So may end users ka, may state ka, may society ka, and then yung next is yung actual telecom operator. Then yung attack perspective naman, if you're gonna be hit by an end user, I imagine, no, someone with a cell phone or a mobile data could actually attack you, which is a reality, no? And outsiders attacking as an outsider or attacking as an insider, or even yung RAN service provider, no, or cloud service provider, the attacking from that element, diba? How and what to look out for. For the assets, there's of course the OCloud, which is a critical component ng ORAN, and then the interfaces that your elements are talking into apps. No, there would be apps within ORAN that it's going to be developed over the years. Let's say for billing or for traffic shaping or ano man. So marami kang pwedeng gawin doon. And you could run it in your ORAN deployment. And of course, machine learning. Maybe for data analytics or data is in relation to ideally in relation to network operations. And then yung mga targets niya, confidentiality, integrity, availability, that's the basic part. But there's now an extended version which needs to be addressed, no? Authenticity and privacy. Kasi although medyo related yung integrity and privacy, confidentiality and privacy, pero not really apples to oranges, no? I mean, I would say related lang, but it's not really the same. Now, for security measures naman, based on BSI, no, they are subscribing to yung mga initial documents ng 3GPP from the previous generation network. Then, of course, yung ORAN discussed security measures. And you would also need to assess them, low, medium, and high risk. So this approach measures the risk for a victim type, no, when an attacker aims to a certain target of which an asset that is or is not protected by security control. So once you have this laid out, and they actually did, no? So there's a link below on where to download this document. So they map it out, no, from stakeholders, and then on the top, and then attackers on the right side, on the left side, and then you have yung protection goals, no? And it addresses yung confidentiality, integrity, availability, authenticity, and privacy. And they have it na parang stoplight color coding, no? Alin dito yung mga high risk, no? Alin dito yung clear tayo na low risk dahil green. Okay. And then you would be concentrating yung yung resource mo on addressing yung risk na you perceive na high likelihood of happening, and then low yung security controls natin. Then it's a huge document, no? It's 79 pages. It's an reading then for the course. I estimate 5 hours, pero I would say this is 5 hours with heavy coffee, no? Kasi madaming technical details discussion, but if you pick up kung ano yung team niya in discussion, it's actually very exciting. And marami lang dito dapat medyo din yung imagination mo figuring out bakit high risk yung classification dito, bakit dito low risk, and you would be tuning it basically to your organization's deployment ng ORAN if you're gonna deploy it. Okay. Now for top risks, no, of Open RAN, so one would be sa SMO, no, sa service management and orchestration, leakage of network information data, which would include configurations, topologies, KPIs ng networks, and OCloud, no. Looks weird, no? Paano pag-leak yung configurations? Now, kasi marami na ngayong proper term doon. Marami ngayong orchestration framework, no, na would configure yung infrastructure mo via code. Like Ansible, Puppet, no, and others, no. And those have interfaces, and if that gets penetrated into and someone had access to it na hindi dapat, no, basically all the configurations ng environment is na dun sa network mo. So that server or that workstation accessing that server and source code should be well protected, but it could happen, no? Others, let's say for configurations, no, topology documentations should not be posted freely, no, even on your SharePoint or G Drive. It would ideally be on a protected enclave, no? But let's say for configurations, no, we've heard of vendors, no? It's a bit an older vulnerability, but it could have happened again, or maybe we don't know. There are some vendors with similar vulnerability wherein let's say you have a router and you have a SNMP, enabled Simple Network Management Protocol, which is a UDP protocol on port 161 that initially you could get telemetry data, no? But for those of you in the network side of things, you would want to configure it with a bit more secure na community string, which acts as a password to access that telemetry data. Now, the default would be public. That's read-only. But you point your tool, no, to that IP address as may SNMP siya. Then you set the community sync to public, and then you could query in telemetry data, CPU usage, storage, memory utilization, MAC address ng mga interfaces ng routers, ARP table, the works, no? You could get all those, but read only. Now, there is a configuration side no, na private, no? Yung default, na read-write yung access. And on some instances that you weren't able to configure it as enabled by default, and a threat actor was able to gain access to a network segment that could query that port, they could actually retrieve yung configuration ng router mo, which includes yung passwords, no? Yung mga common newer configurations now is encrypted, yung password or hash. You could brute force that, no, offline, kasi meron ka na ng copy ng hash. And then if you're able to figure out ano yung password, now you could log into that router. No? So again, there are vulnerabilities in the past that could make that happen. It could also make a rare occurrence, no, for that for the Open RAN. And ideally, it's likely not going to be via SNMP. Hopefully, no, it's a bit dated, no? But something similar could happen for other protocols. So you don't want your configurations to be secure. And any attack that is successful on this side of town, you will get denial of service or degradation, no? Or loss of control for this. Kasi well, you have configuration document and you could do configuration tampering if you're able to access yung mga orchestration na system, no? And from this one, you could now conduct attack if you are able to control this, no? From SMO, you could now attack OCloud, no? Or yung ORAN functions. So you basically could reconfigure your network na at this point, or someone could reconfigure your network, no? And hide themselves. So another security consideration, of course, in data storage protection, do you encrypt yung sensitive data? And this has to do with also encrypting it in transit, meaning pag tinatransmit mo over the network, or at rest. Now, when you store it sa hard drive ng components and elements, is it encrypted? This is more of, in case i-decommission mo yung isang element with hard drives, na would anyone, let's say, hindi properly na sanitize yung disk, could anyone plug that hard drive and then gain information that's sensitive on those na hindi dapat, no? A lot of network elements now, malaki yung mga storage, no? And may storage, no? And even yung mga IoTs and devices, even in the past, no, they thought na walang storage, no? But there is sample nito would be mga photocopiers, no? A good number of them would have hard drives, and no, madalas sa atin mga pinaparenta yung mga photocopiers, no, para walang malaking capex. And then on instances na kailangan palitan, may sira, pull out lang ng vendor yun without actually properly sanitizing yung drive. And typically yung mga ini-scan mo doon or pinapa-photocopy mo mga mga critical documents, no, that would mean contracts, passports, IDs, no? So very dangerous. And there's actually in a study, no, a researcher who bought photocopiers, no, and they found na may isang police station that was using it, and nandun yung mga criminal records, no, na pinapa-photocopy nila, wasn't sanitized properly. So if that happens to you, yung mga components or laptops or workstations for your RAN deployment, would anyone be able to read that data? No. With modern operating systems like Windows 10 and 11, no, may built-in protection like BitLocker, FiabMac, merong file vault, but did you enable it? And it's part of your policy on deployment na bago pa i-issue yung mga units and workstations and servers na ka-enable to minimize that kind of exposure. Now, another control that they wanted is strong password policies and MFA. Now, at this day and age, no, all components should have multi-factor authentication, especially yung mga components with user interactive user sessions, no, like VPNs, emails, even remote desktops, no, they should have MFA. I've been dealing with a lot of ransomware incidents, and for the most part, ito yung mga usual entry points nila. No? So they fish a user to click on an email link. Hindi na nga malware. Malware kasi now there's a lot of controls that could catch it. No, AV, cloud scanning. If you're using G Suite or Office 365, they would catch malware. No? For the most part, no? May bypass pa rin, yes. But it's very hard to develop malwares right now with all those controls. So what attackers now do is they would phish a user, send them a very convincing email, and then once they click on that link, they're gonna ask for the credentials, username and password. No? And if they put in the username and password, well, basically they send yung credentials nila to a threat actor, and they could now log in as that user. So MFA would help. It's not a silver bullet, no? Kasi MFA could still be phished. As we've seen sa mga social media posts nyo, no? Yung mga nagagalit sa mga digital wallets natin kasi apparently nabigay pala nila yung OTP nila sa yung mga bank account nila. No? Nakuha yung username password, tapos nabigay yung OTP. So nagagalit sila bakit nawala yung pera nila. So at that point, di ba, it's either ma-intercept yung MFA, ma-send din ng user yung MFA, or you get dun sa attack called phishing and smishing. Yung voice tatawag sa'yo or SMS. The problem with that is, well, there's really no filter for those, no? It's the user, no? Yung mag-filter dun sa, niloloko ba ako nito or ito talaga yung banko ko or telco ko or what? Tapos may OTP na dadating sa'yo. Up to you. If binigay mo yun, then that practically is yung end goal ng threat actor, mata-take over yung account mo. And that's what's happening a lot, no? But again, that's still a lot better than just username and password. Kasi at least meron silang maliit na window and you could still protect yourself. Kahit nabigay mo username password mo or nakuha nila on some other means, the MFA could still protect you. Just don't give it away. There are other tools now which basically we can cover now, no? But there are other tools that could protect you from this one, like YubiKeys, no? With universal two-factor that uses hardware token. It's not the OTP type na may 6 digits sa input mo pa rin. No? This one is you plug it, you authenticate to the server, the key authenticates to the server, and it also uses part of the computation and challenge and response, yung domain kung saan siya nagpapa-authenticate. So if it's a lookalike domain, it's not gonna work, no? Kasi magkaiba yung how do you call this? Magkaiba yung domain. So, kahit na medyo mukha similar na sa tao, pero the key would know to a degree kasi magagamitin niya sa computation ng challenge and response and it's gonna be different. So, if as of now, this is yung gold standard, no, against phishing. And you could use this across multiple environment, no? Gmail, Microsoft 365, Facebook, no? And others, no? You could use this, and it has some cost though, depending on the model you want, no? So from $50 to maybe $65, no? But sabihin na natin yung pinakamahal na tayo, 65. This is around 4,000 pesos, no? But as of now, this would be yung state of the art na anti-phishing. Kasi nga, you basically eliminated the decision, no, of the human to determine if the site is phishing or not. Kasi you're leaving it to the key, and the key uses the domain as part of challenge and response. And if it does not match, it's not gonna pull through with yung multi-factor authentication. So that's one. For software and artifacts lifecycle, no? So you want supply chain control, no? From manufacturing to source code development, you have version controls, and then you could check, of course, yung vendors safe continuous integration and continuous deployment practices ng vendor and even in your internal system. And are you using actually anti-tampering techniques like digital signatures, wherein if may patch for the system tapos it was supposedly provided by a vendor, could you actually verify that firmware if it's digitally signed by the vendor or walang digital signatures? That's gonna be dangerous right now. No? you're gonna load the firmware na walang digital signatures, how do you know it's not tampered? No? Or walang in-inject doon na backdoor code from a threat actor pretending to be your vendor. No? So pag in-upload yun, they would have access to dun sa system mo, and your element would call back to the threat actor for additional controls, commands. So for orchestration risk, ORAN basically does not want and cannot replicate the work done by other SDOs, no, regarding orchestration. And basically, yung European Telecommunication Standards Institute, or ETSI, mini-mention siya sa Open Network Automation Protocol, or ONAP, no, framework for RAN orchestration and slicing. And attacks orchestration can be as sophisticated as they would just manipulate yung mga service logic, no, or even aim yung service degradation and denial of service, which happens on experience, no, sa Russian-Ukraine attack, no. They were able to disable, no, yung mga critical infrastructure and before the actual attack, no. And they did I would say a dry run before, no, 2014, I think, no. Initial attack sa critical infrastructure, power systems in general sa Ukraine, okay, and then they did it before they launched the attack again. Okay? And they would, of course, want to target the automation aspects of Open RAN, take control of it. Now, dun sa Open RAN security testing document, no, so they have this some sort of risk assessment sa component of it, where meron kang threat actor, this one below, and what components could they attack, okay, and then may description and documentations on how do you test against it. Now, when I read that document, I would say hindi siya ganun ka-in-depth. It's more of a guideline on how to do it, but the testing and methodology would still rely on yung current industry standard for penetration and security testing. Well, again, this would just give you para you don't miss anything na, oops, ito, might want to test this, then you might not want. You would want to test this, okay? And then this component to this interface, and this interface. No? So, like this one. Risk one is, could you actually tamper with the descriptor dito sa service and infrastructure descriptions? No? Maybe you could inject some code and mababago yung logic. Could you actually do that? No? And anong credentials requirement? Baka basic username password lang, or baka wala kang credentials diba? Depending on how the vendor implemented this component. Or diba? On the interfaces, ang risk number 2 is unsecured communications, no, over MANO interfaces. So if you run a sniffer or protocol analyzer on these components, and you started seeing, or that protocol analyzer is able to decode, no, various components of the message, then that means it's running on unsecured communication, which again, it's 2023. Ideally, all communications within the ORAN environment is per element, no, and interface, it should be encrypted, no, so that wala kang issue with risk number 2 for unsecured communications. Now, for risk number 3, diba, could the threat actor actually access the MANO directly and do the modification there? No? Parang, if you could see, no, parang paano mangyari? No? A lot of, well, if not all, no, ORAN is running on IP. So if this is laid out on a flat network without improper segmentation, this could be possible. No? And I could relate this to typical websites natin, wherein on my day job, no, we do tests on banks and other industries, no, and they would most likely be protected with a service called Cloudflare. No, so it's an anti-DDoS web application firewall cloud solution, wherein yung DNS or host name ng mga sites na gusto mong protektahan, tuturo mo kay Cloudflare. Okay, and i-configure mo sa Cloudflare ano yung back-end system, no, that's reachable on the internet. Okay, para ma-access, no? Ipa-proxy via Cloudflare, and the proxies and Cloudflare does the filtering and managing ng traffic, no. If it's a DDoS attack, they're gonna mitigate it. If it's a web application attack and you have rules and license for it, they're gonna analyze and drop it. And they could do it na yung actual request they could read, kasi hindi naman siya HTTPS end-to-end. While you could do that, you won't have the function of the WAF if end-to-end mo pina-encrypt kay Cloudflare yung transmission. So the encryption initially terminates with Cloudflare. They would be able to read yung actual request, analyze it, filter it if it's an attack, and then send it to the backend. So what happens when we do testing is, well, you are protected with Cloudflare. It's very hard. It's hard to attack. Well, you could still attack it with logic issues, but it's beyond Cloudflare scope. No, like some banks would have OTP bypass, or you could do fund transfer, sourcing from other accounts. That's possible, no? If lalo na when we do the testing doon pa lang sa UAT environment, hopefully it does not go into production, but we've seen that happen. And worst, what if we could find yung backend IP address nung nung server na pinapasahan ni Cloudflare? Because, well, some newbie network administrator does not think that we could find it, no? Yung backend IP. But yung IP address allocation sa Pilipinas is very limited. If you scan all of it, given enough time and resource, you would be able to find it, no? So ideally sana, the backend server is protected by a firewall that has a rule. You would only allow access to this server if you're coming from a Cloudflare IP address, kasi the traffic is being proxied to via Cloudflare, no? And so the IP address that's gonna access yung backend service that's exposed to the internet would need to be coming from Cloudflare lang. Diba? So you don't want that interface to be accessible to the entire internet, kasi if we find it as an attacker, you would be able to bypass yung protections na inoffer ng controls of na ginagawa ni Cloudflare, kasi direct mo nang i-access yung backend. And sad to say, no, when you do network deployments like that, iniisip ng mga network admin, security admins, well, protected tayo ni Cloudflare, so the security on the backend, di na natin masyadong kailangan problemahin, which is wrong. Okay? And once you do found a bypass of Cloudflare and access that service directly, like what's being stated here, diba? Wala ka ng control. Anyone could now probe on it and pick on it, and hindi mo, tapos wala pa nagmo-monitor. Doon na nagkakaroon ng issue, no? And then they'll realize na lang pag na-fraud na yung mga transactions, no? And even as simple as that, no? Pag tinignan mo yung diagram na to, parang simple naman ang gagawin, no? Papadala ako ng various descriptor, titignan ko kagad, mag-sniff lang ako dito ng protocol analyzers, and hanapin ko lang yung backend. That's it, no? So, but if you step back and try to imagine ano yung concept behind why they would want to itemize the risk here, that's how you should think, no? To think as a threat actor. Now, for the OCloud, we have various implementations na follow several models here. And this alone, no, ang daming components ng ORAN that you would want to assess, no, for risk, no? Like of course, computing infrastructure, your identity and access management, right? Data at present in transit, we discussed that. Yung networking, no? Severely implement microsegmentation, wherein each and every component would be on their own virtual local area network, and you have firewall rules in and out of that VLAN. Kung sino rin dapat kausapin, ano IP address, anong port, that's gonna be allowed. Yun lang i-enable mo para anyone gets inside a certain component, they're practically contained there, with very limited access going out. And ideally, we have this saying in security, no? Prevention is ideal, okay? But detection is a must, no? So again, ideal kasi ang hirap na i-prevent nun. But if you do best practice and you still get attacked, no? Ideally, you would be able to detect them kasi there's a anomalous behavior that's happening on the environment, and you could certain degree of time, no, detect them immediately and yank them out of the network and do your investigation. And of course, you have your software lifecycle management from continuous integration and continuous deployment. Make sure that that code and that process is secure end-to-end, because well, that yung mga configuration ng mga apps na iraran mo sa ORAN network would be coming from that pipeline. And well, lastly, of course, we would want awareness and countermeasures, no? So all components must be logging yung mga activities nila and send this to a centralized logging or what we call an SIEM, or SIM, depending on how you would want to pronounce it, where it aggregates all the logs, and ideally you have analytics there to detect anomalous behavior or malicious behavior. No? And someone's monitoring it. Kasi may naglalag to, pinapadala, pero wala nagmo-monitor. So how would you know kung may nag-attack? Or may nagmo-monitor pero hindi siya trained to detect and analyze, then you have a problem. No? Kumukulan na pala doon na bino-brute force na yung mga orchestration framework natin ng via SSH or whatever protocol. Tapos ang daming logins, different passwords and username. It's on the logs. Pero yung you call this, yung analyst mo na nag-monitor, hindi siya trained. Okay, they see the logins, pero as long as hindi nag-alert na you are being brute forced, kasi wala kang use case for that, they're not gonna know how to react. So you also need to train them well. Now, for O1 interfaces, no, security. So there's a lot of basically breaks down into three, no? Yung scope, yeah, ano yung ginagawa ni O1 interface, which basically would be provisioning, fault supervision, performance monitoring, and the rest, no? And ano yung possible security controls ni O1 interface? And if you check yung components na dito, it's not James Bond type, no? But it's basic actually. SSH or TLS for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Then you have yung mga network configuration and access control model, no? Then you have yung group mapping, no, for identity via LDAP or OAuth2 yung authentication. It's a defined standard, and we've been using this for more than a decade, maybe 2 yung iba, no? Like SSH, TLS, no? So nothing new dun sa mga security controls na implement mo, nothing magic. Again, most of ORAN would be running on IP anyway. Then after you define the scope and security controls, you have the risk, diba? For O1 interface. So denial of service from attacks to provisioning. So if someone is flooding your network and requests, baka hindi yung mga totoong users hindi makapasok or hindi makapag-authenticate. Or pwede mag-leak, no, ng sensitive and fault, sensitive leakage of sensitive fault and performance data related to RAN elements, or just by hitting that interface, o one interface, pwede ka magkaroon ng degradation, no, ng functions, no? Kasi well, they have to process and analyze each and every request, pero kung basura yung request, no, it's just a denial of service, then you won't be able to service yung real request. Attack complexity would be medium for the fact that, well, this is not a publicly available interface. No, it's gonna be part of your O1 interface. This is the O1 interface in your ORAN deployment, and you have to be in the network, no, for you to be able to access and even attack this. Hence, the attack complexity is medium kasi, well, threat actor needs to be inside. But if it's an insider, then you have more problems actually. So additional complexity, bakit naging medium as well, you need to understand ano yung mga request, ano yung format, ano yung protocol na ginagamit nito, and ideally you would have an insider ready to do that for you. But again, nation state threat actors would have some sort of documentation, or they would be able to study your environment, and they could do that with given resource and time. But again, this is not publicly exposed. This is not a website or web API that you could interface from the public internet. Hence, you would see na, yeah, ito yung attack complexity that we're dealing with here. We'll have something similar sa O2 interface. Again, this one naman is yung sa provisioning. No? This one is for inventory, monitoring. May provisioning component din naman. Software management, lifecycle management. Okay. And if you check yung security controls niya, no? Ito medyo mas manipis, TLS lang. Okay? Yung isa may SSH pa. And then yung risk, medyo similar, no? DOS attack from to the infrastructure, degradation of RIC from O2, data manipulation. And yung complexity niya would be low and medium. So again, some attacks are not ORA specific, but at this point, again, we're running mainly on IP network. So hence the note na ORAN specific, but rather IT oriented. So risks and apps, service denial or degradation against UEs, no, or wholesales, no. You could alter policies ng non-real-time RICs and alter use of enrichment information sa non-real-time RICs. And while this is something new, no, kasi altering medyo alam na natin yan, no? Yung machine learning data poisoning, this has been in discussion for quite some time now, no? But this is a real attack. As mentioned kanina, if you could poison the data ng machine learning, you could now hide, no, on that environment wherein yung malicious behavior mo supposedly as a threat actor would blend in. Kasi based dun sa learning data ng ML component, well, you're supposed to do that. Okay, you were able to basically inject yung rules, no, for machine learning to not detect you as an anomaly. And others, no, medyo press for time. So for RICs and apps, no, walang new. We've been doing this for quite some time, no? Strong authentication with multi-factor, strong access control with least privilege and RBAC, role-based access control, resource and app isolation. We've been doing this even sa mobile phones natin. If you remember, no, meron tayong terms sa mga phones like jailbreaking. It's because each and every app on our device is isolated, no? And they are on some modern phones, no, they are isolated by your virtualization. So you are running on a separate environment and you don't actually know ano yung nirarun on the phone, no? Yung mga multiple apps na nirarun sa phone. So that's how isolation works. And if you actually jailbreak your mobile phone, as the name implies, you break this isolation, so your malicious app or jailbroken app could talk to the other apps or manipulate them in a way, or at least karamihan na nagja-jailbreak na alam ko it's more of to install pirated apps na they don't want to pay with, which is a bit weird, no? Kasi modern phones now cost almost 100,000 yung mga high-end nila, no? And you're telling me you don't want to purchase $5 app kasi wala kang pera. Para kang bumili ng ng Ferrari tapos wala kang panggasolina. Pero ayun, and you want to jailbreak and break the security na pinaghirapan gawin and isolate each every app because you want to install pirated software, no? Now imagine, that pirated software is most likely not free. Usually may kasamang tropa yan, trojans, spyware, whatever, no? And you're risking your security ng mobile device mo which has your life now for $5, no? Or I mean, yeah, you get the point, no? And with OpenRun, no, these kinds of apps, it's not really gonna be similar to the phone apps, no? But yung mga apps that would run yung OpenRun mo, ideally you would be running them on separate isolated environment with dedicated resources or maybe shared resource but still a good isolation. So you're hoping that on the event that someone was able to crash it and take control of that app, no, restricted pa rin yung kaya niyang gawin, and ideally you would be able to detect that anomaly and investigate, and if it's a threat actor, kick them out of the network, no, and do additional controls so that it won't happen again. Then on the software level security, we do have secure boot. Again, we have this on our computers right now, UEFI, TPMs, mga security enclave, those technologies. We got to also mitigate, of course, yung mga open source software disk control. Again, but I don't agree much on this part because even the closed source would have this vulnerability. They're banking on the idea that, well, the open source is public na yung source code. And they also have proven na hindi porket open source, maraming tumitingin, no? That could mitigate yung risk of vulnerabilities. We've had that issue with the Log4j. It's public, it's open source, but still may nakakita ng critical software which has been there for quite some time. yung vulnerability na yon, that's recently na-discover. So if the argument that more eyes is more secure, medyo nag-fail siya sa Log4j. But still, on the counter argument, someone was able to see it Diba? Pero again, depending on how you would use those items against your argument, no? But again, I want to keep it neutral kasi hindi naman tayo laban ng open source sa closed source na discussion. Another software inventory process, strong patching. And again, may setback sa patching kasi those who patched immediately no, sa SolarWinds, they were the ones infected. Pa dyan. The threat actors ideally have been there for quite some time na rin naman. So I wouldn't put it na they're gonna make a strong case against patching immediately because may SolarWinds issue. I would still want to have everyone patch immediately as long as the patch is available. But do it in a manner na may process, no? Again, if you're on an infrastructure type of deployment ng patch, no, you don't want to patch in production. Ideally, meron kang clone environment, which is gonna be expensive. Patch that there and then test kung nagwo-work pa rin siya appropriately. No? And even in workstation and servers, diba, you don't really patch it immediately pag nandiyan. Usually, you patch certain workstations, test yung environment, ma-under ba lahat ng softwares as needed, and then you gradually deploy it. And the problem, meron tayong regular monthly updates, no? Like kay Microsoft may Patch Tuesday. By the time na matapos may yung testing and deployment, no? Minsan hindi pa tapos. May Patch Tuesday na naman kasi it's been a month. No? So it's gonna be a repetitive cycle. Okay. And next would be A1 interface. No? So this one, scope niya would be policy management, enrichment information transfer, and machine learning model management. So, and you could interact with the A1 interface using APIs. Again, ideally, it's gonna be via HTTPS or by now it should be HTTPS, no? So you don't want to expose yung mga API request mo here na unencrypted tas tinatransmit. So if it's unencrypted, hindi man anyone on the proper position sa network could observe and maybe manipulate those requests in transit if it's not encrypted. So ideally, you would want this na encrypted using HTTPS. And in regarding to HTTPS, yun din yung security controls niya. It's actually TLS. No? And then risk, medyo similar. No? DOS, leakage of sensitive info, and then yung type of attack na complexity niya would be low and medium. Threat actors would need sophisticated attacks. No? Sophisticated attacks would need deep knowledge, no, of the use cases because they won't be able to manipulate it if hindi nila alam kung ano yung request format, request parameters, no, and behavior ng network. So they might be able to inject some requests, but if it crashes the network or it makes it behave na hindi intended, mawawala access nila kasi again, it crash or madedetect agad sila kasi it's not part of the usual request. So they would need deep knowledge ng deployment and API calls, hence making the complexity low/medium. For the E2 interface, this is yung near real-time service control. You could also use this for support functions and E2 applications. No? And for this one, they are stating na you would want to communicate to this interface via IPsec. No? IPsec is not only for VPN. No? Well, we've known this to be used via VPN. No? But even within our internal network or in this regard sa ORA network, you would want to implement IPsec for device host-to-host communication, which would basically encrypt all traffic for those two communication hosts. No? And again, not a lot of people know that IPsec could be used for that. Pag sinabing IPsec, usually VPN lang kagad yung iniisip. No? But you could enable IPsec even if you have a touch lab environment, no? Workstation and server, na Windows, enable IPsec, end-to-end. It's gonna be encrypted na yung communication between those two devices. So, going to the risks ng E2, meron ng mga DOS pa rin, leakage of sensitive info, and attack complexity. No? Again, medium to high. Kasi at this time, aside from hindi mo directly accessible tong E2 interface, you need deep knowledge, no? Yung mga use cases again. Okay ba? So last for the interfaces for security, no, we got the open frontal interface. This is yung P2P LAN interface. And it allows the split between DU and RU, no, for enhanced distribution ng mga and opening ng mga run functions. No? So this is where you could interface with the control plane and the user plane. Synchronization and management also happens and configurable using the frontal interface. Now, for this one, ang recommended security controls nila would be authentication before you are able to access that interface, and port-based authorization via 8021X. So again, depends on where you are. A lot of you might have heard of this protocol sa wireless to authenticate sa Wi-Fi 8021X, wherein you're not using pre-shared key, but you're gonna use a dedicated username password per user. And the Wi-Fi would talk to a radio server, yung Wi-Fi access point, talk to a radio server. The radio server would have an LDAP backend or a directory backend to determine if tama ba username password. And if it's true, it's gonna return it back to the access point and tsaka ka pala papa-accessin sa network, no? And the benefit of it sa Wi-Fi, at least pag may nag-resign na employee or user, no, you would just disable the directory account and wala na siyang access sa Wi-Fi. Now, if you're an organization, let's say maybe 50 or users ka at least, no? Pag may nag-resign ba na employee, do you actually change yung Wi-Fi password yung na pre-shared, no? Hindi. Most of them hindi. So, with that employee, if disgruntled siya, could go back into the network and cause damage. They could, no? But, again, 8021X solves that kasi directory-based yung authentication mo per user. So, if someone resigns, disable the directory entry and they won't be able to get back to the network. So that's the Wi-Fi part. On switches, no, and port access on switches, you could enable then 8021X, no, for managed switches. Well, again, dapat wala na nag-run na unmanaged switch at this day and age. But if you have a switch, you could configure it to do authentication via 8021X. So any device na you plug on that environment needs to be authenticated, no, bago pa i-enable ng switch yung port niya. So initially, it's gonna ask for credentials, dapat ipadala, and then similar, the switch would talk to a radio server, the radio server would talk to a backend server na directory and validate. May pinadala sa akin password, ito daw si user ganito, tama ba yung credentials niya? And then the directory would say yes or no, diba? Bago ka bigyan ng switch port access. So that's one of their recommended security controls sa front hole interface. So risks would be well, denial of service, and then attack complexity would be medium to high, because this component is actually hidden. It's not supposedly user part of the user environment. So it has to be, it will be configured on a separate segment ideally. And you just, again, kaya 8021X yung control, you just can plug anything on that network and be allowed access, no, to infrastructure. We now want to do security enforcement. No? So we got penetration testing as recommended way to do yung security testing ito. We'll have some examples later, no, depending on the time sa dulo. We want to detect all activities and key events in both OS and application level in ORA. No? I've seen environment where they are not actually doing this in the tech part. Na may incident na lang, tatawagan kami to help out, only to find, pag tinignan mo yung box that was supposedly compromised, deleted na yung mga event logs. And kung Linux man yung mga var log data. And you cannot see anything kung ano nangyari. You have to do forensics, mas matagal na mag-analyze. Okay. Well, in fact, if it was designed properly, you want to log everything on the host. Pag sabi nila minsan na, mahal yung storage. I mean, that might be true 20 years ago, no? Ngayon, 1 terabyte is just how much? No? A few thousand pesos. So even if punuin mo ng logs yung 1 terabyte na drive, still not gonna be that expensive, no? As compared to what kind of investigation yung gagawin mo kung wala ng logs. No? And one common misconception was, I see, OS lang yung nilalog nila. No? Yung application side, which is, I would say, more important, in ORA. Again, OS would have is important, but application is more important kasi nandun yung interactions ng users and orchestration, most components. No? Kasi OS typically host lang siya. But it's the application that's actually running the environment. So you still want the OS kasi mga management and administration would happen here. But you need to log your application level. And again, you want to log it dun sa local host, but you would want to send this to an SIEM. Okay, para meron kang single source of truth. Kasi by the time na magkaroon ng access yung threat actor dun sa machine, ideally, yung detection logging configuration mo has already sent yung mga activities niya before that attack sa SIEM. Okay? Which is gonna be your your trusted single source of truth for whatever happens on the environment. And kahit i-delete ng threat actor yung log sa local host, ideally, hindi siya makakatalon dun sa SIEM. No? Gonna be a separate and different credentials, different protections. Now, to protect, we want to apply yung mga best practices to prevent intrusion. CIS, NIST, zero trust philosophy. Again, you have proactive controls, no? Firewall, WAF, IPS. But this has already been being done in typical IT environment, and you would want this also in your RAN deployment. Now, that said, RAN is gonna be a high capacity network. So hindi na dito yung mga pang SME natin or even yung mga enterprise grade, no, na firewall and WAF. It's gonna be heavy duty telco grade. Kasi, well, you're gonna be a telco if you're gonna be deploying this. So it's also gonna be expensive. So sa ORAN, Security Focus Group, no, may mga test specs and recommendations sila which discuss, no, basically what we've been discussing for the past few hours, no. So robustness ng SSH, TLS, DTLS, and IPsec, mga versioning niya, cipher sheets supported, certificate management, passwords, how do you have robust password policies? Sample niyan would be, I'm sure you remember, no? You have the mga password policy organization, 8 characters, alphanumeric, uppercase, lowercase, with special characters. So that was designed by the US government in the 1980s. Because of their computing power at that time, they could crack it with a certain amount of time. And ideally, before that happens, meron ka ng additional policy mo to change the password, no, at certain interval. Now, again, 1980s, that's 40 years back. No? Karamihan sa atin, di pa pinapanganak nun. With the computing power now, that 8-character password, kahit gano'n pa complex yan, it's gonna be crackable with GPU within an hour. Now, hence, yung mga robust password policies that's being recommended now would be the length. No, that's what matters. No, not even yung complexity with special characters and numbers. If you have a password of around 16 characters, no, regardless kung may number yan or special characters, that's gonna be assuming the developer stored the password hash using strong hashing, no, that would maybe take billions of years, no, to crack, no, at 16 characters. So that would be yung best approach. And even NIST now backtracks on yung password change na every 30 days or 90 days depending on. So they think that it's less secure kung pinapalitan yung password kasi, well, people would have to write it somewhere and remember X number of passwords, baka nakalimutan na nila, then you have availability issues, no. So again, the recommendation now is not 8 characters with complexity. It's a very long password, or what we call it now as passphrase, no. You also would want as a recommendation, no, vulnerability scanning, okay, in infrastructure level, application level, and fuzzing. Fuzzing would be sending out random data, no, or not really random, some a lot of data and figuring out ano yung magiging reaction ng system. No? So is it behaving and defending itself as expected, or biglang nagka-crash at nagbigay ng root terminal? No? So that could happen. And also protection against denial of service and flooding attacks now. But at this time, if someone's able to do denial of service sa iyo, sa internal network, medyo may malaking problema ka. Kasi would you expect a typical user ng RAN network mo on a mobile phone could cause a denial of service, no? Ideally not. There should be controls in place, or maybe on the radio part, or yung next na radio unit, that it could have also some sense of protection against denial of service bago pa dumating sa core network. And a lot more are still being discussed. So that's the security ng Open RAN. And then we're now gonna go with yung mga frameworks, no? Like this one, Zero Trust architecture. It states to never trust and always verify. No? Kasi again, you're using a lot of different components and elements in your Open RAN environment. And each and every request must never be trusted, and it should always be verified. Kasi it's coming from a box na most likely gonna be a black box, but it's talking to you kasi standard yung interconnectivity niya, and interoperability. So they would be able to talk to a box that you are maintaining then. Okay? But you need to determine, is that request authenticated? Is that request authorized? And is that request coming from the trusted, not really trusted, unknown element, no? Before you even process it. So hence the component na nire-request or nire-recommend the Open RAN to do a zero trust architecture. Never trust any one of your elements and treat them hostile, so that each and every request would have to pass through certain tests. And yung classic example ko dito would be, let's say lang sa isang corporate network, or mas ako sa banking finance. So, sabihin natin teller environment, no, sa isang bank. Marami silang workstations doon, and would there be a reason why two teller machines, no, hindi yung ATM, no, it's more of yung human teller, no? Would there be any use case where two workstations ng teller would need to talk to each other? For the most part, wala. You could say na, hindi, kailangan minsan may print. Well, that printer should be on a separate network. And you would have to route through it. And then, pag dumaan sa routing, may logs that would indicate na this teller printed on that printer. But two workstations na teller A at teller B communicating with each other, walang use case. Kung sinabing, hindi, may kailangan i-share na file. Don't you have a SharePoint or a file server for that na pwedeng i-upload doon, tapos may scanner ng antivirus, ma-audit sino nag-upload, ma-audit sino nag-download. Diba? That's more mas maganda yung security controls rather than two workstations. Okay, teller A, teller B, ito yung isang file, paki-process nga. Diba? You could still account it, pero diba, if you're running, let's say 1,000 tellers, no, could you still monitor that kind of behavior? Medyo mahirap, no? So ideally you have controls in place like that na no two workstations should be able to talk to each other without any valid use case. And for the most part, wala. And even on Wi-Fi, no? If you connect to a Wi-Fi network, what's the use case na yung iPhone mo magta-talk sa Android phone nung friend mo? Diba? Let's say you're on a single Wi-Fi network. There's no use case for that. So ideally, you have this feature called client isolation in Wi-Fi. If you turn that on, your phone practically only sees the gateway to the internet, and that's it. So kahit marami kayong Wi-Fi device on that local area network, you cannot talk to each other. The access point is actually blocking those attempts, which is good because you're not sure of the security posture ng mga device na kasama mo sa network, especially na public network. Baka yung iba, 3 years na hindi napapatch. Yung isa naka-jailbreak na may malware, diba? That could have attacked you or redirect your network traffic. So you don't know that, and that's going to be more secure, no? With the Zero Trust architecture na enable natin client isolation. You just need the Wi-Fi for the internet anyway, just go straight to the internet. Again, no use case for you to talk to each and every devices. So best approach. So you have here some sample reading, no? 59 pages of NIST SP 800-07 for the Zero Trust architecture. 59 pages, but very interesting. Again, estimate that would be around 3 hours. Again, very interesting read tong zero trust architecture. And if you could now imagine din yung describe nila on this document, makapagising mo sa umaga after mong basahin to, no? Meron ka ng mga pwedeng i-implement sa organizations mo, not only for Open RAN. So this is a good paper to read, no, for security controls. Now, moving along, we have defense in depth. This one is you basically start with yung data, no, and you put secure enclaves across it and put controls, no. Kasi each and every one of that component would be attacked differently, and ideally, let's say on this graphics here, no, if someone was able to gain access to your network, let's say may weak Wi-Fi password na nakapost sa pader, pumasok sila doon, oops, they could access the entire network na pala, which happens. Tapos guest network pa pala dapat lang yun. If it starts attacking your host, no, ideally the host would be able to detect and ward off that attack and notify yung SOC. But someone's attacking me from my network, so please take a look. And on the event that they were able to break into that host, okay, or saw the application on it, the application meron din dapat siyang component of detection and mitigation. So if now the attacker starts brute forcing your web application or API for credentials, for access, no, using credentials na harvested somewhere, the application should be able to detect that and report again doon sa SOC monitoring. Hence, important yung monitoring and skills ng analyst. So if not, tas tumagos yun, well, they would getting access to the data, which ito naman yung gusto talaga ng attacker. They're not after your host, your application, they're after yung data sa loob. That's the ultimate goal. So defensive network controls, there's a lot of it. You got, of course, yung physical controls for gaining access to that actual hardware, no? You got the fences, guards, dogs, CCTVs, and the likes. Now, for the technical controls, you have yung mga hardware and software components, like firewall, intrusion detection system, or for storage, now you got this encryption, file integrity, and then for protocols, you have authentication, so a lot more. And then for administrative controls, well, you got the policies and procedures of the organization. Like for password policy, are we still implementing 8 characters or are we gonna do the minimum 16 characters? And are we gonna go away with yung every 30 days palit ng password, or ano na lang, parang recommended na lang to change the password pero hindi siya enforced. So that's part of your admin controls. And for the device, do you allow BYOD or are you not gonna allow BYOD or be your own device, no, to the network, which is a whole different discussion, pero nakakatakot yung BYOD. Short discussion on BYOD. It looks good on paper kasi you are practically transferring yung ownership ng device, no, dun sa users and employees nyo. But how do you ensure now yung security ng device? Naka-enable ba yung disencryption? Pag nawala yung device, could you actually remote wipe it? Or kung di naka-enable disencryption, so yung mga data ng corporate mo nandun na sensitive, configuration ng Open RAN mo and everything. So how do you do that? And then, if nasira yung laptop or mobile phone, sino magbabayad? Diba? Pag corporate equipment yun, well, you have your replacement process nyo. Diba? Pa-file lang ganito, bigyan ng bagong hardware, then they could go on. But ito is, pag nasira, parang, how do you do that? And if may incident, tapos required yung laptop na BYOD, papayag ba yung employer niya i-forensics yung personal laptop niya na nandun yung mga communications niya sa mga chats, email, social media? So again, that's a whole nightmare again to deal with security. And yeah, kaya kung may tanong kayo about BYOD later and if you have time to discuss it. But yun, that's the problem I have as a security, wearing a security hat on BYOD. So principles ng defense in depth, well, you have uniform protection. This would need to provide same level of protection across all networks. Then you have the secure enclaves where sensitive and critical segments should be deeper into the organization para hindi siya madaling ma-access, and marami controls to do it. And information centric kasi you're not protecting the infrastructure. Di ba? Isipin nyo na lang na pinaprotektahan nyo talaga dito would be in data. Diba? The infrastructure is there as an enclave, diba? Para mahirapan silang pumasok sa data and kunin yung data nyo na unauthorized. And then you have to do threat modeling and vector analysis to focus on shutting down vectors. Pag may nakikita ka na, pwede pumasok dito, pwede ma-exploit to, vulnerable tayo dito. First thing is to identify it. And once you have identified it, you basically won half the battle na. Then you could now put controls and justification on bakit kailangan yung protektahan niya. And of course, management would look at yung cost-benefit analysis. Ano ba yung likelihood mangyari to? Maliit lang. And magkano yung protection na kailangan? $2 million. So, given that, baka hindi nila prioritize yun. If you could prove something na highly likely pwedeng mangyari, catastrophic yung mangyayaring incident na if ever that occurs, so maybe kahit na $10 million yun, they would fund that controls for you to implement. So, got another reading here for 58 pages. Again, masyado maraming reading din sa security course. But it is what it is. In security, if you do not want to read, you basically lose kasi ang daming happening. Never a dull moment. Well, you're in engineering, so you've also read a lot of books. So this should not be anything new to you. Okay. Then we have a NIST cybersecurity framework. This one could help organizations protect and secure yung environment nila. And this is also recommended by the ORAN Alliance. And it has 5 functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So for identify, we want to develop understanding. Yung mga risks natin sa environment, ano yung mga systems natin, ano yung assets, ano yung data, ano yung process. And we document yung information flows. Kasi from a Wi-Fi, ano yung pwedeng i-access ng operator, ano yung mga kaya nilang gawin, and do you consider Wi-Fi na medyo not trusted? So if you're gonna access yung mga internal tooling nyo, basic operations lang pwede mong gawin kasi you're coming from the Wi-Fi network. And if you want yung mga more complicated and critical configuration, you would only allow that if you're wired or coming from a certain network segment. So but that comes into play if you're able to identify that assets and processes. Then for the protect, well, you want controls to protect yung mga sensitive data mo through attacks against confidentiality, integrity, availability, and privacy. So do you conduct, let's say something here, do you conduct regular backups? And for the most part, some story here on the backups, it's used to address availability issue. Na-corrupt yung hard drive, sumabog yung server, diba? And you have your backup, you could restore it. But nowadays, this is also masyadong open yung backup, I would say. So again, we're addressing availability issues. But I've seen ransomware attacks na organizations na we have recover, wherein the threat actor would destroy the backup bago nila i-encrypt yung environment. And since ang sinasolve ng backup for most IT infrastructure right now is for availability, it's easily accessible from the host na kinompromise nila. And they could easily destroy it. So now you have to, again, doing risk assessment. Paano kung ransomware operators yung titira sa amin? Could we secure the backup part? And could we have an offline backup as a component of it? Para in case they were able to get to the backup, you still have yung devices mo na offline. So ang dami naming tinulungan na hindi man okay yan, ma-recover natin kasi may backup na mga may. Only to find out pagdating mo sa backup, okay, sira na rin. Or we have this one story na magaling daw yung pagkakaset daw. Medyo obvious na. Magaling daw yung pagkakaset up nila ng recover nila. So kahit na nasira yung environment nila nung threat actor, hindi pa uso ransomware na to. They have an offline or disconnected backup daw sa cloud. Okay? And they secure it kasi at that time wala pa masyadong trust sa cloud. They were able to secure it properly with encryption, so walang problema. Anyway, so when we were restoring yung information, well, I'm just managing the restoration. They were able to download mga 10 terabytes of data from the cloud, which took some time, especially with our bandwidth. But once they were there and they started to do restoration, pag restore nung backup, no, dun sa server, pagka-click ng restore, nanghingi ng key. Kasi nga encrypted eh. And then nagtinginan yung backup administrator, parang key? Then they just realized that yung key na hinahanap nila nandun sa server na sinira ng threat actor. Tapos pinormat na nila. And kahit anong recover namin doon, hindi na makita. Okay, na-overwrite na. So, ayun eh, parang medyo nakakatawa na nakakaiyak nung na-realize nila na wala silbing backup nila na encrypted. So they secure it, but they did not do proper key management. So useless din yung yung data na na nakuha nila. And then there's also here sa protect, no, train users. It's part of the protection. And I would say, lagi sinisisi ng mga security guys, no, na hindi kasalanan ng user yan, tanga yung user, naman, hindi alam gagawin niya. It's not how I view it, no. If the user was able to click on a malware sa workstation niya or kinik niya yung link tapos binigay niya yung credentials niya, I would say that's a failure of the security team. Hindi siya failure of controls, multiple failure of controls. A component of it would be awareness din ng user, hindi mo din train properly. So I wouldn't put it na blame dun sa user. Ideally, if ever they do get compromised, hindi siya dapat makakos ng damage, no? Or very minimal lang yung damage. You should be able to contain it. And that would happen because the security team assess the threat properly, do proper segmentation, nag-zero trust sila, nag-defense in depth. Diba? I mean, the mere fact na yung malware nakarating sa workstation ng user, diba? Ang dami na nilang dinaanan na controls. Ibig sabihin, tumagos sa lahat na yun. Diba? And then now you are blaming the user kasi kindik niya yung malware. Diba? That should not have happened in the first place. No? And if it did happen kasi natagusan na malware kasi magaling, advanced persistent threat, it should have detection components in place, no, na para hindi ma-minimize yung damage. And even as simple as application control, no, wherein you would want as an admin to determine ano yung allowed applications on my network to run. I mean, could look draconian, no? Higpit naman lahat ng application ililista ko ano yung pwedeng paandarin. But on a corporate environment or a bank or a telco, diba, why would an operator need to run Solitaire or Minesweeper, or let's say if you're using Firefox for a browser, now why would you allow them to use Chrome? Diba? You have a list of known and vetted applications na sign na you would only want them to run. So that means kahit may antivirus ka, tapos yung malware na dadating may bypass for that antivirus detection, the mere fact na it's not part of the allowed list ng application control, it's not gonna run in the first place. And you would be notified, and hopefully you have SOC and trained analysts that would detect that, uy, yung configurator natin na machine, nagtatry mag-run ng unauthorized executable. So kahit walang signature yung antivirus mo, you should be able to detect that and diba, shut down kaagad on extracts. Now, that said, application control meron pa rin mga bypass doon. But again, you're doing layered defense and ideally you catch the threat actor on each and every step. And may saying din, may saying ngayon, wherein ang hirap ng defense ang hirap nung engineer sa defense side because you have to get everything right, no? Kasi isang mali mo lang pwede yun yung pasukin ng threat actor and then tapos ang kaso, no? Resume generating incident, apply ka sa iba. But on the flip side of the coin, when we do penetration testing and red teaming then on my day job na to penetrate an organization, we now also need to get everything right. Kasi kung maganda yung pagkakagawa ng defensible architecture ng environment, isang mali lang namin madedetect kami. Diba? We inject a malware na hindi properly tuned, diba? Tapos nag-run or may application control, that gets detected and bablock agad yung IP namin. And it's very hard to recreate an infrastructure, no? So for an attack, hence win for the organizations na tinetest namin. Okay? And well, good job sa kanila. But that said, no, sobrang depends on which side of the fence you are in. But yeah, that's the protect side of NIST. And then on the tech, ito na-discuss na natin. We want to check for yung testing na update detection ng process natin. No? And then we want to know expected data flows. And if any anomaly, you should be aware of it. And all logs, as mentioned, no, should be recorded and sent to a SIM, and someone has to monitor it. So this becomes a problem when you task yung monitoring part on people that is not trained for it. So how would they know kung ano ang itsura ng attack, no? Or how would they investigate a malicious alert if they're really not into security? You need to train them. And common na mistake na nakikita namin dito would be yung they implemented this, may logging and aggregation. And then kausapin yung sysad, parang, Chief, paki-check naman nito from time to time. On top of their job na sobrang overwork na sila. So it's not gonna work that way. You need to train individuals, and meron silang specific responsibility for monitoring this component of your architecture. And again, if they are the threat actors are detected, ideally you should be able to respond, and this response must be planned and tested before an actual incident, and ensure that they are updated as the threat landscape changes too. So kung ano yung mga, you could see naman sa news, ano yung mga common attacks. But to be honest, right now, it's really gonna be phishing pa rin eh. Yung phishing and social engineering, that's the most common entry point ng mga threat actors. So, diba, how do you minimize that risk? Multi-factor. How do you even more minimize that risk? YubiKeys using universal two-factor. And how much more attack surface could be reduced? Then keep your services na hindi naman kailangan i-access outside minimal. Like, why would you need SSH to be accessible publicly wherein ang dapat na entry point to our organization remotely is via VPN? Diba? So bakit may RDP na expose publicly for some admin to manage yung internal network, where in fact, diba, you eliminate lahat ng SSH, lahat ng RDP, we have a policy, you have to VPN. And then when you do VPN, meron kang MFA, and then once you're in the network ng VPN, you have a jump off host wherein you could do your management, no? So that would eliminate yung and reduce yung attack surface, no, for RDP na pwedeng i-brute force, or SSH that was configured lax yung security configuration. So you try to minimize, and you cannot eliminate the risk, but a goal is still risk reduction. And if that's happen, no, katak, na-detect natin, nag-respond tayo, we now want to recover, and diba, ensure again, yung recovery plans natin are tested and updated, and you communicate properly to internal, external stakeholders. So, you've seen this, diba? Organization gets attacked, nagkakalat sila dun sa response and recover na part, no? And yung public relations, iba-iba yung sinasabi ng mga different groups within the organization. Ideally, you have a SPOC, single point of contact, na lahat ng information sa kanya ipapipe, siya mag-filter with a team ng comms and PR before they release a statement to the public. No? And ideally, it's not a lie. No? Na hindi kami inaata, kanya, but it's someone, okay in disclosure, but given just enough information, pwede lang malaman ng tao as the investigation and recovery is still going on. So for NIST, again, readings, no, 51 pages, estimated 5 hours. Interesting din to, cybersecurity framework. No? I think may version 2 soon. Hopefully it gets released para ma-update na rin tong documentation na to. Then we have CIS, Center for Internet Security, Critical Security Controls. So these are 18 critical security controls that you could help, no? That could help your organization, no, and infrastructure defend against majority of today's threats. And what happens was they got a lot of agencies, no, in the US and third parties to come up with what they experienced, no, on the attacks, on what could have prevented those attacks and detected them immediately, and what could make it more highly unlikely to occur again. So, and they threat modeled it from nation states, APT, financially motivated attackers, commodity malware, and even script kiddies. No? So this was also headed formerly by the SANS Institute. Used to be called SANS Top 20. It's now 18 critical security controls And it's divided into two major components. So it's the first 5 in yung basic controls, and the rest in 13. And we want, basically, they want you to focus on low-hanging fruit like inventory and control, vulnerability management, control and usage of admin accounts. Kasi these are basics naman. Why would you want a service for threat intelligence, EDR, XDR, WAF, no? Kung yung inventory mo sabog, di ba? Hindi mo alam kung nasaan yung mga ORAN components mo, hindi mo alam kung anong IP address yan, anong version ng OS na nag-run, mga firmware, di ba? And you want yung mga best bells and whistles on IDS, IPS, and PATAVs, no? But this basic one, you cannot even have a grasp, no, ng inventory. And the problem here is, well, how could you protect something that you don't know exists on your network? No? So have as detailed and updated inventory as much as possible, and that's going to be part of the 5 critical security controls. In the rest, well, they are specific now to technical areas, no, like emails, malwares, networking, IR, and penetration testing. So more of on the process and additional controls. And ideally, you comply first with the top 5, okay, and then the rest should follow. No? And here are, this is a free poster na from CIS, wherein it outlines yung mga critical security control, and then now yung version 8 na. So yeah, I won't be discussing this, but this is good detail. It's gonna be part of the reading then ng course. And you have this audit script now. So you could download this, just Google audit script, CIS critical security controls, version 8, wherein you'll have here graphs per control. Okay, ito yung summary page ng dashboard. And let's say for control number 1, which is inventory and control of enterprise assets. You would just be filling up yung mga questions dito. Like for 1.1, meron ka bang policies for that? Kasi that starts everything, no? May policy ba dapat? And then after that, meron ka namang control na ini-implement. Okay? And is in control enforced, and control is reported to business. So you check whichever is applicable dito, and you have an idea ano yung missing mo. And then eventually, diba, you get a score per control, and then meron ka ditong I would say generic, no, na grade, no. And ideally you would be into level 5 for the maturity rating, 0 to 5 scale, but now meron kang scale. And each and every improvement, you could determine ano dito yung control na mahina tayo, and ano yung high risk that if you don't implement, we will be vulnerable. Now you could pour in resources to improve that. Let's say for this year, CCSC number 11 and number 14 yung concentration natin. And then over the years or over the time of implementation, you have a graph na ano ba tayo dati? To say maturity 1.2, after a year naging 2.1 tayo. So that's a good benchmark, ano yung level of security natin when we were doing self-audit using a CIS critical security control. So there's a good tool to use. And then part of CIS, they also have this CIS benchmarks, wherein they would give you documentation on how to secure Oracle Linux, Oracle Solaris, Red Hat Enterprise, Ubuntu. Okay? And it's a big document, no? And what would happen here is like the sample, no? On the Ubuntu CIS benchmark, they would actually give you yung commands, no? On what to do to ensure use of privilege commands, and it's collected na automated. Diba? Saan siya applicable? Level 2 server, level 2 workstation, ano yung description, ano yung rational, and what do you actually run na command, no? So that anything na gagawin ng privileged user or privileged command is executed, it gets logged to an audit, and ideally the audit gets sent to a SIM. And then you have here remediation, no? Ano yung pwede mo makita, for an example. So yeah, very detailed and up to the command level. And this is just for Ubuntu, no? So they have a lot, no? From Oracle, even the database, MySQL, Postgre, Windows, Macs, iPhones, they would have CIS benchmarks that would allow you to get secure configuration. Now you could implement all, but it's going to be very heavy. It's more of, this is a reference, read it, and then check on applicable sa environment mo, and then apply it. It's good. So for the course, we'll have this exercise now na they're gonna install Ubuntu 20.04 na LTS VM, roughly mga 2 hours. And implement nila yung most recommendations sa Ubuntu CIS benchmark, roughly around 8 hours. So we'll split this into 2 days. And this is gonna be recommendation, and then yung findings, no? Roughly for 2 hours. So that's how we would want to implement this. Anyway, I'll for last, no, before we go Q&A, I'll demo lang yung not really demo. Don't think we have time for vulnerability scanning, pero let's do a pen test scenario. So just to give you an idea kung ano yung, what do we mean by when you say pen test. So this is a case study on a pen test that we conducted a few years back, no, on an organization, a large financial organization. I'm sure you know them. And we started with a vulnerability scanning. So it's more of you have a tool called Nessus or Qualys or whatever vulnerability scanning engine you have, scan the environment and do false positive validation, kung ano yung tingin mo na magiging critical sa kanila, ano yung totoo, kasi some of the output ng tools is invalid and not applicable really to the organization. And that's our issue with the current landscape ng penetration testing services sa Philippines, no? It's a lot of the pen test report that I review, it's just a VA tool na niran, tas hindi man lang false positive validation. They just repackage it on a document and then submit it to the client, which is a disservice sa kanila, to be honest. So but us, when we do it, we want to give more context. We want to do false positive validation, and since this is a penetration testing, you want to go deeper than just a VA or vulnerability assessment. You want to go get the crown jewels ng organization and figure out ano ba yung kaya mo talagang gawin with that vulnerabilities, no? Kasi we had this issue na pwede kasing dalawang low severity vulnerabilities or isang low severity, isang medium severity na looks not associated, but if you could combine them, you would have a critical vulnerability. And that's not going to be done by the tool. You have to have a good analyst to check and validate yung mga findings na yon. So on one pen test, we got access to the internal network via phishing, and then we started scanning the environment, no? And then we found a printer with a default credential, no? Typical. I'm sure you'll have this on your environment. May printer kang kinabit sa network. They did not change the password. So why it's a printer, right? So when I saw the result, I went to the printer using a browser. Okay, kasi may web UI siya. And I found this is a document scanner, no? Yung document management workstation wherein you have a printer, network attached, may scanner siya, and it's uploading to a file share. The problem is most would stop, no? Dito sa default credentials and report it maybe as a low or informational severity kasi it's a printer, no, with default credentials. So when we check that it was a document scanner and it's uploading to a file share, medyo agad bright idea na, well, the only documents you're scanning is typically yung mga important ones, no? So if I could get access to that file share, definitely it's gonna be patataas ko yung yung severity level. So this is the UI. And on the UI, meron tayong username and password and path and IP address kung saan niya ina-upload, no? But there's this test button. Okay? So get back into later. So I got the admin tool, dinownload ko from the internet. I tried to back up the config, hoping that the password would be there for the file share, but it failed. Not sure why, pero wala dun yung password. Okay? So now I did set up a fake file share. Na ang objective niya is to capture the credentials. And I went back to the config UI. I modify yung destination IP kasi I'm admin sa printer with the default credential. And then I hit the test connect button. So when I hit the test connect, of course, the printer would see the IP. Oy, gusto niya akong pa-connectin dito. So the printer connected to my fake file share, SMB file share. And the printer spewed out yung credentials. But which is good. Ang problem is, it was a network authentication na NTLM authentication hash. Hindi siya usable sa network. So, or dun sa file share. But since I know my authentication protocols, this is in a form that could be crackable. So with a cloud environment na meron kaming password cracking cluster sa AWS using GPU, we submit the hash. Okay? We typically would just want to run it for 48 hours. Kasi if it's a very complicated password, definitely we're not going to crack it in a billion years. But baka machambahan namin, we're giving it 48 hours with this certain amount of computing power. And if we're able to, the system's able to crack it, it's gonna email me yung plain text password. So we try to run it there, and true enough, within 8 hours, the system emailed me, and I got credentials to 192.168.10.244, yung file share nila. Okay, so went back to the network, mounted that file share, and then when we are searching sa scanners, no, easy, high severity finding. Kasi nandun yung mga IDs, nandun yung mga contracts, scan, copy, no. And when we did some browsing some more, no, again, more in-depth, we found that this is a network attached storage, tapos doon binabackup ng admin then yung mga workstations. And we found 2 developer workstations na may backup with source code. So we got some of those, and then we searched for credentials na may username and password pair, and then we found an access to a database. And then when we check the database, kasi it's a developer workstation, parang, okay, baka maka-access tayo ng devs database and we could maybe gain some access to it and then check it out. We plug in the username SA. So for those of you sa DB admins, you know this is a Microsoft SQL Server na system administrator. And then hit enter, okay, to the login server na nakuha namin from the config file sa source code. And then boom, pag-check namin, bakit may recent transaction a few seconds ago? And started scrolling. Ang daming transactions na ginagawa. And then we realized, no, this is not a test database server. This is the backend server ng financial organization. Na nandun lahat ng transaction. Credit card, savings, checking, everything's there. And what I want you to see is, this is how an actual penetration testing should look like. And unfortunately, a lot of the pen test reports I've seen, they start and stop with the vulnerability assessment part, which should not be the case. You have to do end-to-end. And if you check yung entire flow on how we did this, walang magic eh. It's more of a system and network administration skills yung ginamit. Maybe the password cracking, but could easily Google that. How to crack passwords with GPU cluster in AWS and just understand the concept. But that's it. That's just the component na say medyo weird, no? But yeah, the rest are a system and network administration skills. Anyway, so I think I still need to leave some more time for the Q&A. Thank you, everyone.
Ito, this one from Arnel Gruspe. Sir, available na po ba for download ang OpenRun firmware kernel source code? If so, is there a repository that keeps track of the latest version and bug fixes?
Sir Arnel, yes. Yung source code you're referring to might be individual components of OpenRun. I haven't seen it. And walang hindi siya end-to-end na single monolithic na may nagde-develop for OpenRun. Usually it's per element in development. So it's up to the vendor if they're gonna publish it or they're gonna release it as open source. Then you're gonna see it sa GitHub nila. Now that said, may mga telecom open source software, mga OpenBTS na you could maybe run an OpenRun on it or make it a component of OpenRun, but wala pa ako nakita na end-to-end na full open source na OpenRun. No? Again, big vendors, of course, would want to keep their intellectual property. So I doubt that they would release the source code. And as mentioned, no, yung Open Run, yung open sa Open Run is not necessarily open source. It's open for interoperability and interconnectivity. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Okay. From Carlo Trinidad, what are the things Open Run is working out, as there are some concerns that Open Run's more diverse vendor landscape and software supply chain will expand the potential attack surface. Plus, increased complexity makes it more difficult to secure systems, especially we are going to cloud technology.
Yes, that is a good question, no? And it's heavily considered by Open Run, since dati you just have to talk to one vendor. Now you have to talk to a lot of vendors, and each and every component you have to test individually. So what's happening now is, well, I've discussed some frameworks, no, that is going to be useful to test this out and contain them, like NIST cybersecurity framework, zero trust, defense in depth. And if you keep everything and think of them as untrusted elements, no, you would now be able to make your policies in a way na heavily restricted. Kung ano lang kayang gawin dapat nito based on specification, ito lang yung gagawin niya, and ito lang yung specific components na pakausap mo sa kanya. And that said, all of these components should be logging yung mga application side nila, okay, and sending it to your SIEM, so you now have more visibility as compared to what we have now with our current single vendor deployment na you bought it for billions of pesos, tas it's a black box na you cannot upgrade or tweak to your liking without notifying the vendor. In fairness naman, since hindi naman trained yung operators natin to code for yung mga single monolithic systems, no, the vendors doesn't want anyone to just code and upload it there and crash the entire infrastructure, no? So there's pros and cons. But yeah, it adds Open Run basically added a lot of complexity, kasi now it's multiple vendors, multiple softwares, multiple vulnerabilities. So if you, and as Open Run recommends, implement microsegmentation, logging, its visibility, containment, you should be in a much better position. I'm not sure how better as compared to the single monolithic deployment as itong diverse side. Yet to see, no, as we start implementing Open Run in our telecoms.
Hi, sir. May I ask what security measure a cybersecurity expert must take into account if the threat is coming from the inside of the network? Thank you.
Yes, that's a hard question. Yun yung problem with trusted insider attack, no? Especially if sysads yung titira sa'yo. As using kanina, meron akong article about a Tesla employee na was trying to be given $500,000. That's a lot of money, no? And I'm sure, no, I mean, we got a case recently, no, sa election natin. If you recall, last January, no, last year, before the election, there was a group called Exox who claimed to have access sa source code ng Comelec, where in fact Comelec denied it kasi hindi pa naman daw tapos yung vetting out ng candidates at that time. So wala pang ballots na piniprint, the system is offline. And it turns out it was Smartmatic that was compromised, no? And what the attackers did was they asked the help to a degree, no, nung isang job order na tester ng Smartmatic na pinangakuan siya ng not sure if 100,000 pesos, not dollars, pesos, with some training materials. And not sure ano iniisip nung mamang yun. Binigyan ng access yung threat actor sa laptop niya na may VPN dun sa internal network, no? So, and they weren't able to detect that until pinublish na online. Tsaka nag-investigate. Now, if that's the case kasi, diba? If you're using principle of least privilege, defense in depth, diba? That job order contractor, kahit na naka-VPN siya sa network, limited lang dapat yung mga device na pwede niya ma-access dun sa mga machines na dapat authorized siya to access. And marami dapat logging, so dapat makita dun sa workstation niya na, oh, bakit naka-multi-home tong current VPN configuration, tapos may, let's say, unauthorized software, no? Dapat may application control ka. Bakit may remote control software na nag-run ngayon dun sa laptop na hindi naman dapat? So, ang daming controls na pwedeng ilagay at i-distribute. Walang 100% foolproof, may bypass, yes. But if you put enough of them, it's gonna be very hard for a threat actor to dodge each and every one of those, and you should be able to detect them. No? So I'll put it at that.
Mhm. Thank you, Sir Mon. Question from Rosemary Diaz. How would Oran Alliance Security Task Group define that enough testing has been done already to declare that Open RAN is secure for actual deployment? What are the criteria and baseline measurements?
Wala pa ako nabasa about that. It's more of guidance on how to test, and they are referring to the industry best practice to do it. And unfortunately, you would be reliant on the security testing vendors, no, na services. And if you are not picky on how you pick the vendors, you would always get the lowest bidder. And well, you get what you pay for, basically. But I also seen on the other side of the fence na sobrang mahal ng singil, pero VA lang din yung ginagawa. No?
Mhm.
So you should educate your purchasing team, your IT team, your IT security team to be able to determine what's how you call laway lang, no? na bid specs as compared to ang talaga kayang gawin.
Mhm.
And go with trusted vendors, no, or those that have proven themselves na they could really do the testing. And it's not just gonna be a VA scan. Kasi VA scan, why pay them 2, 3, 4, 5 million pesos, no, for a VA scan? Kaya mo naman gawin ng sarili mo. And then you do the mitigation na yan. By the time na dumating sila, tas VA scan lang ginawa, then ideally sa contract you have something na it should be penetration test, not an automated VA scan yung gagawin. So,
Mhm.
and unfortunately, yun nga, maraming when we help out banks for fraudulent transactions, no, na OTP bypass sila, na nanakawan yung customers nila ng wallet, and kiklaim nila, na VAPT na to ng ni vendor X for quite some time. Parang nangyari pa rin yan. Well, they did the VA and the PT part, pero puro automated ginamit. No? Yung logic checks, unfortunately, wala pa tayo sa level ng AI and machine learning that could do the logic checks. Well, hopefully it happens in the near future. I'm not sure if it ever will. Well, hopefully it does. Para madali na rin yung trabaho for security testing. Kasi yung mga automated security testing now, it gets the low-hanging fruits, but the logic issues that cause banks and telcos to be defrauded, you need an analyst to really check out ano yung call flow, saan ko pwede manipulate, ano yung response ng system. So, yun po.
Thank you, Sir Mon. From Ralph Gerald Sanggalang, are PUFs or physical unclonable function being used in ORAN devices to add device level security?
Best, pero wala akong nakitang mandate to use this, no. But you could have HSMs to do your key management. You could have YubiKeys to do the multi-factor authentication. That's also basically tamper-proof, no. So no one's preventing you from using it. And of course, the more security controls, the better. But you also have to match it with yung risk appetite ng business, 'di ba? Parang do you actually have funds for that? Baka, 'di ba? I-apply mo lahat ng security, gastos ka ng $100 million. Yung target market mo nasa $2 million lang pala. So what's the point? So you have to go with the business. But it's more of they are informed of the risk. And if they're still willing to do and operate with that level of controls, then it's the business decision basically. Ang duty mo na lang as security is make good threat modeling, identify all the risk, likelihood of happening, and implications, and give it to the management so that they have a more informed business decision. Hindi sila pwedeng, hindi ko alam na pwede pala mangyari. So it's your responsibility to inform them and for them to decide. Willing ba sila to accept the risk or maybe transfer the risk, no? Maybe cyber insurance or additional controls. Pwedeng yung AV na nire-recommend mo nasa 5,000 per endpoint pero walang pera, but maybe we could do away with 1,000 peso per endpoint. I mean, they would have to balance it out para it would make business sense for them.
Okay. Thank you, Sir Mon. Next question from Jimmy Chua. Is there any information that blockchain or distributed ledger technology is used for exchanging identities of users and storing records of all user identities that are linked together using cryptography and used as a tool for designing a self-organized and secure radio access networks?
Daming buzzwords. But there is a use case. You could do it. But yung my take on my end is if it could be done with RDBMS or relational databases on its own, why would I make it complicated in using blockchain? So the main purpose of blockchain is if you need a decentralized na na component na no one manages it, no. So and that also would counter basically if you want some controls on the environment. Paano kung nag-shutdown yung blockchain? Right? How do you access now your information? So may mga pros and cons, and I would say check the use case. It could be done definitely. Na pwede mo gawin yun. But is it viable? Is it worthy of implementing? Is it worth the risk? Kasi again, if you check blockchains, no, most of the transactions would be in plain text. Anyone could read it. Diba? It's just distributed and secure. So do you add security and encrypt it? You could do it. Pero paano ngayon yung recovery, diba? If you lose yung key management. So a lot of pros and cons to consider. But yeah, I would say someone would try it, and if it does make sense, then they would implement it, of course. But for now, I would want to keep it simple. Kasi sabi ko na pinoproblema to secure each and every element, dadagdagan pa ng blockchain, parang baka sumabog. But that's just me. I mean, of course, maraming blockchain advocate, they could do it easily, but I wouldn't consider myself a blockchain expert. I did take a subject once in UP for blockchain a few years back, and there was this notion to conduct election in blockchain, and I was saying na it's not gonna work, you know, kaya naman ng RDBMS yan. That's what I'm saying now. And yung naging project ko was I have to make a blockchain na based na election system. To I mean, di ba? It's one thing to dish out this technology, but it's another thing to implement it and really figure out what would work and what would not work. No? Again, so it is doable. There are certain use cases that you could do it. Let's say for blockchain, kasi nga, again, you want anonymity and decentralized control. So let's say you're gonna use it for election, di ba? And COMELEC, let's say, would be the central authority. Nasaan na yung decentralization doon? So, and yung secrecy of ballot to a degree, well, you could do it kasi anonymous yung mga wallet, but if someone was able to map out yung users sa wallet, kasi well, COMELEC needs to give the wallets to individuals na valid voters. Could you track their votes? Most likely. So paano na yung confidentiality of the ballot? So may mga pros and cons eh. But yeah, I'm sure yung mga blockchain guys would kill me kasi may mga sinabi akong mali. But that's how I experienced it way back. I'm sure there's a lot more updated technology now that some of the or most of the what I said is now considered wrong. But yeah, that's how I experienced it.
Okay, thank you, Mon. Next is from Randall Ramones. Does OpenRAN implements common security policies in all vendors, or it will be depending on the country or geopolitical security policies?
As far as I see it, puro recommendation lang sila. So I wouldn't know how it would be implemented. So yeah.
Okay.
I can't answer basically.
Question, sir, one from Doji Danyosos. With the increasing trends of malwares, what do you think is the best way to minimize its breaches in tandem with available technology, other than awareness?
Yeah, there are antivirus and EDR solutions, no, that detects malware, but again, there are bypasses on it. So you need, I would say, at this day and age, no, implement application control to allow whatever application to run, and anything na hindi nakalista doon sa allowed list is gonna get denied, no. There are free solutions on it. Mac, if you are on a Mac, there is Google Santa implemented by Google sa mga Mac environment nila, which They called it Santa because the software knows who's naughty or nice. And meron kang reporting kung ano yung mga in-execute ano yung dinenay. And then for Microsoft, there's a built-in one, no, for the enterprise, si AppLocker, na you could implement for free on your group policy. And surprising that not a lot of admins knows about that existence ng tool na yun. So if you could implement those types of stuff to minimize yung unauthorized execution of software, that would minimize your risk. And then of course, detection. Log everything and send it to us. So in case anything happens, meron kang ideas ano nangyari, sino mga affected, ano yung pwede mong gawin to plug kung ano yung naging point of entry ng threat actors.
Okay, thank you, Sir Mon. Next question from Darnell De Luna. In the Philippines, who are the appropriate person to do VA or PT? Do we have sort of agency handling it?
Oh, our organization does it, Red Rock, but medyo cross-selling, no? There is a list in DICT, no, of authorized penetration testers, but I would say na do check out yung skill set, no, and experience ng mga individuals. Don't just go with the lowest bidder. So I would leave it at that. I don't want to basically cross-sell. So, may DICT of authorized penetration tester locally.
Another question from Sir Noel Ocampo, Sir Mon. What frequency should organizations comprehensive test their security vulnerabilities?
Frequency, It depends on your risk appetite. I've seen organizations na may continuous testing. I've seen them done once a year, which is high risky, no? Kasi pwede may vulnerabilities na hindi mo pa nakita. I've seen organizations get 2 to 3 penetration testing teams, no, na iba-iba yung skill set to conduct the test sa system nila. So walang right and wrong. I would say check your risk appetite, no? And you know na kung once a year, I mean, tas may lumabas na vulnerability a month after, meron kang 11 months exposure na hindi mo alam, di ba? So get a good team, get a good risk team, and then they should be able to tell if may feature ka ilalabas, di ba? Uy, medyo baka may fraudulent transaction dito, then you could warrant a testing. If cosmetic lang yung change, baka hindi na kailangan ng testing for this feature. So the organization should be the one to assess gaano ka frequent yung testing nila. And I do subscribe na okay kumuha ng iba't ibang team to test kasi iba-iba skill set niyan. And yeah, you'll encounter a trash report, so don't repeat that. And also get industry recommendations kung sino yung okay na testing firm to get for specific components.
Follow-up question. Meron daw normal industry standard.
Yes, for web there is OWASP. For web there's also API testing for OWASP. For penetration testing, marami. May OSTMM, may PTES, Pentest Execution Standard. What I couldn't point to for web okay si OWASP, no. So and that's what we're gonna be running for the most part, no. But for the rest I cannot say kung which is better. And most of them medyo outdated na rin sa mga current attack methodologies, no. So I would say get a good penetration testing firm na kahit wala sa standard but they would know how to test yung specific components, like may vulnerability ba tong firmware, could this firmware handle specific loads, or could they crash it with a maliciously crafted na request. So yan, I'm sorry, hindi ko nasagot na diretso.
Question, Sir Mon, galing kay Ray Lagumbay. Hi, Sir Raymond. How does 2 or more different vendors' equipment will communicate by encryption? Who will define the keys? If this is a valid question. If there's a 2 vendors daw, sir.
Yeah, the encryption is standard. That's part of the interoperability. So they say na HTTPS yung usap natin, the one with the client, the other with the server. And then if may feedback from the result ng operation, di ba, pwedeng i-post balik nung isang vendor. So HTTPS is or via web API call or whatever protocol, it would be part of the interoperability standard. For the keys, well, if you have a root CA, ideally you could configure your box to use a certificate na generate mo from your root CA para everything is validated and could be validated as a chain of trust. Kasi if you put different keys per device, no, and there's no way for that device to validate if that key is part of the CA or not, then mag-accept ka lang ng any certificate which would not be which is not secure. No?
Mhm.
So ideally it should be you should be allowed by the vendor to configure your own certificates and keys per request, no? or per module.
Okay, so probably our last question for you, Sir Mon. From Invictus Fiesta, what does the Google use in their data securities from corporate companies?
Google, well, to a point, Google uses YubiKeys across all their employees. Kasi they are heavily attacked via phishing. So what they determined was if they want to eliminate or minimize that risk on phishing, they check the technologies and they are supporting universal two-factor, the UTF standard ni YubiKeys, wherein you could buy multiple YubiKeys and register it to your account para pag nawala or nasira, you could still come back in. That's what I'm using. And I even disabled SMS sa Google Authenticator para wala akong way to, nagpapanik ako, kailangan talaga enter OTP, tapos phishing pala. No way to do it. I have to use YubiKeys. Okay, and aside from that, yung YubiKeys naman, di naman siya nakatie up to one account. You could use it sa Gmail, sa Office 365, sa Facebook on one YubiKey, or I recommend two if you're gonna use personally. And that makes it more secure kasi again, even though lookalike yung domain, you will not be phished with your OTP kasi the hardware would use the domain as part of the challenge and response and you're not gonna be able to complete the challenge and response nung MFA part kasi it's a different domain that the key is checking out.